But there are some cases in which any failure is unacceptable. If you remember our series on airline travel, you know how safe it is to fly these days. That's because the industry and its regulators decided to collaborate in order to reduce commercial airline crashes to zero. And so, today, as the CEO of Delta Airlines told us,
it's safer than riding a bike, safer than driving a car, safer than crossing a street.
There are other places where you might think there would be zero tolerance for failure.
It's very popular for organizations to describe themselves as learning cultures. We're going to experiment and we're going to try. But school safety can't be a learning culture because the consequences of a failure are too serious.
That is David Reedman.
I'm the founder of the K-12 school shooting database, and I'm the only person that records every shooting at a school in the United States.
Reedman is getting a PhD in criminal justice at the University of Central Florida, but he is not one of those PhD candidates who went straight from college. He grew up in Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., and went to nearby Georgetown to study literature.
What happened in the middle of college is I had been a volunteer in the fire department since I was 16 years old. And when Hurricane Katrina happened, I felt that I couldn't be sitting in a classroom amid this national disaster. So I took a leave of absence and I began working as a reservist for FEMA. I worked on disaster recovery and response on New Orleans, and that really started my career in emergency management, which then progressed into Homeland Security and intelligence. I worked in various roles on the contractor side in just about every capacity, from science and technology, through emergency planning, through intelligence analysis, monitoring watch centers. I'm really a Homeland Security generalist.
If you had to sum up David Reedman's central motivation, it might be this: protecting innocent people from terrible things.
And ultimately, that led me to the Naval Postgraduate School, where this school shooting database project started.
For years, Reedman ran the school shooting database out of his bedroom. It will soon become part of the Violence Prevention Project Research Center at Hamline University in St. Paul, Minnesota. By now, Reedman has recorded every school shooting in the U.S. since 1966, more than 2,600 incidents and 1,000 deaths.
The database is not just a date and a link. Each incident is carefully set up with standardized continuous or categorical variables. There are more than 200 different variables about the who, what, where, when, and how, but also information about the location, about the situation, the shooter, the victims, the weapons used, and then lots of pieces that add extra context within the school day. Where in the school building did it occur? During what period of the school day? Morning classes, lunch.
Why does Reedman care about all these details? This goes back to what Ed Gallia, the astrophysicist turned disaster scholar, told us, that most tragedies come at the end of a chain of events. For David Reedman, assembling that chain takes a lot of time.
Oh, easily 40 hours a week. I get about 30 Google alerts every morning at 7 a.m. And the first 90 minutes to 2 hours of my day are going through those Google alerts and updating the database, transferring narrative data from a news report into relational database data that's coded in all of these ways that can easily be sorted and filtered for just about any research question is a time-consuming process and something that is not easily automatable.
David, you sent us an email a while back. It said the causal chain leading up to a school shooting has dozens of events, and every single one of them needs to be a failure for the shooting to occur. Any single success would break the chain and prevent the shooting from happening. That sounds to me like both an empirical argument and almost a philosophical argument. Can you unpack that for me? What do you mean by that?
I think that it's both empirical, based on looking at now thousands of incidents, and philosophical, because, as you said, leading up to that shooting, there's this causal chain of actions. And with each one of those actions, There's either a right or a wrong decision that can be made. And one right decision is going to break that chain. I think an incident that really highlights this is the Oxford High School shooting in November 2021.
This is in Michigan, Oxford Township, Michigan?
In Michigan, yes. There were 4 students killed, 7 wounded. But leading up to this attack, just 4 days prior, the parents bought the 15-year-old shooter a gun, and he posted pictures with it online. And then the day prior to the attack, he was caught Googling bullets. His teacher saw this and made a report of it. So everyone should have been on high alert. Students were on high alert because there were rumors circulating of a school shooting. You get to the morning of the shooting. He's taking a test, and on the test, he draws a picture of himself committing a school shooting. And the teacher sees this test, is clearly worried, and sends him to the guidance counselor's office. The guidance counselor could have called police or asked other staff members to come in and help her. The guidance counselor did a suicide screening, but she didn't interpret the results in a way that would show that he was actively suicidal. The parents could have checked the gun safe before they got to the counselor's office and seen the gun was gone.
At this point, it was still not known that he was in possession of the gun?
Yes, Stephen, he had the gun in his backpack. And at any point, one of those adults could have looked in his backpack. His parents also could have said that he has told them that he's actively suicidal. He was telling his parents, he was sending text messages saying that he was having bad thoughts. He wanted to hurt himself. He wanted to hurt others. The guidance counselor then could have said, he probably shouldn't go back to the classroom. Why doesn't he go for a formal mental health evaluation? And lastly, the parents could have thought, there are all of these different things going on here. Why don't we just take him home? But they didn't do that.
The shooter pleaded guilty to 24 charges, including 4 counts of first-degree murder. And his parents are being held in jail on charges of involuntary manslaughter. They are the first parents in the U.S. to face criminal charges for a school shooting committed by their child. They have pleaded not guilty. And the parents of one victim have filed a lawsuit against the police department for failing to intervene. The Oxford community is still waiting for the school district to publish a full report of the shooting. David Reedman thinks that school officials may have made mistakes that day, but, he says, if you take the chain of events approach, there is a much bigger problem that leads to a failure like this.
We have no national guidance and no common playbook for how a school official is supposed to react to the threat of a school shooting. It's on people to essentially make it up when they're in these circumstances. After 9/11, the public was engaged in preventing terrorism, and we created the See Something, Say Something program, and every citizen knew what to look out for and knew what actions to take. And from taking those actions, you would immediately get the attention of federal resources that would make sure there was an investigation. That's what we've never done in the context of school shootings. We tell people to look for red flags, but we haven't given clear action to take. And even if that action is taken, there's nothing to make sure that that information doesn't fall through the cracks. There's a multi-billion-dollar school security industry. It's based on people's assertions about what they think might be good ideas for school security. But none of it is based on empirical evidence. Even the procedures of run, hide, fight are not rooted in any empirical study. On the softer side, I think that we have proven strategies and systems that could really be a model for this. We have a National Poison Control Center. It has a $25 million per year budget, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the estimated $3 billion that's being spent on physical security at schools. And with the National Poison Control Center, if you're worried that you or someone you know has ingested a poison, you can call a number from anywhere in the country and get somebody on the phone. They have expert knowledge. They're going to give you immediate actions to take. They're going to connect you to the resources that are around you, and they're going to help you make a plan to get there. We could take that same model and apply it to a national crisis center where we tell people to look for red flags.
So let me ask a few questions about that. First of all, what you're describing would be, what's your generic or descriptive term for what you are seeking here, what you're advocating? Is it like a red flag system for school shootings?
I think the National Crisis Center would be more than school shootings, even more than mass shootings, because what we've seen leading up to a mass shooting or leading up to a school shooting is a person who's in crisis and they're actively suicidal. And within that umbrella of somebody being suicidal and in crisis, you can also have self-harm, you can have physical and psychological abuse, you can have substance abuse. And this would be a resource that would provide services across all of those different major issues. A one-stop resource where somebody who is concerned that they're seeing the red flags in a friend or classmate or coworker can go and get assistance, get a plan of action. That is paired with investment in community crisis intervention training, as well as violence interruption programs, because we know that community violence interruption programs have been successful to prevent shootings.
Isn't it a little bit shocking that there have been so many school shootings and something like this hasn't happened yet?
It is. Really, the biggest objection is the thought that if there's a tip line and red flag laws, that will lead to guns being taken away from somebody. That if you have a widely available system of reporting, that somebody who is an innocent gun owner will have an anonymous report made against them and then have their guns seized.
And how would you respond to that critique? What would you put in place to prevent that?
I think that that's a very difficult policy question to answer because it comes down to the philosophical point of, do you care about the public good or do you care about your individual freedoms? And I try to look at history and look at the context for these events. And following Ruby Ridge and Waco and Oklahoma City, we put very significant restrictions on who is allowed to buy explosives. But I fear that this is an issue that's far too polarized. And I get death threats just for reporting school shootings.
Can you describe one?
Oh, yeah. I get emails that say, we're going to find you and you'll be eviscerated in front of your family. So, it's a very careful path that one has to walk. And I really try to objectively report a problem that is in every community and every part of the country over now a 60-year period of modern history. And I do that in really an objective manner that can be studied for just about any research purposes. I'm also extraordinarily hopeful because far more shootings are averted than attacks that happen. So just last month at a high school in Ohio, a student walked into the bathroom and he found a bullet that was sitting upright on the toilet seat. And he knew that something was wrong. So he went and he found the school resource officer, the vice principal, the principal, and a teacher, and told all of them there's a problem because he wanted to make sure that he was heard. And they took him seriously. They watched the surveillance footage, figured out which student had left the bathroom, and they detained a student, and in his backpack, he had a loaded handgun, 3 loaded magazines, a hit list, and a written plan to commit a shooting that day. And that is because these mass shootings and these school shootings are public suicides. And somebody is going to cry for help until the moment right before the attack. And that bullet was left there, hoping somebody would find it. And that's the opportunity that we have. If somebody knows what to do and has someone to talk to, we can prevent almost every one of these attacks.
Reedman has collaborated with other academic researchers, including Jill Peterson and James Densley, co-founders of the Violence Prevention Project Research Center. In 2021, they published a book called The Violence Project: How to Stop a Mass Shooting Epidemic.
For their book, they interviewed convicted mass shooters in jail. And one of the questions that they asked each person they interviewed is, who could have prevented this shooting? And the answer they got was anyone could have prevented the shooting. I think that's why we need this system where the public knows the red flags, knows that there's somebody in crisis, and then has a system to get that person help. There's a gentleman named Aaron Stark, and he did a TED Talk about when he plotted a school shooting when he was in high school. He was a victim of serious abuse at home, and he thought that this school shooting would be something that would finally really get back at his parents. He had bought the gun and he had the plan, and there was one classmate who reached out to him and said, "Why don't you come over to my house and have some lunch and let me get you a clean shirt?" And that one act of kindness showed him that his life had value, and he never committed that shooting.
We reached out to Aaron Stark to see if he would give his recollections.
Absolutely. My name is Aaron Stark, and I am currently an assistant manager at Come and Go here in Denver, Colorado. I have a wife and 4 kids, and I'm also a public speaker who flies around the country talking because when I was a teenager, I used to be a school shooter.
So what was Stark thinking at the time?
I was going to cause as much damage as possible, kill as many people as possible, including myself. But the actual targets, I wanted to make my parents deal with making me. I wanted to make them deal with creating a monster.
And what kind of lessons does Aaron Stark think we should take from his story?
I would say the biggest lessons from my story are to remember that up until the point that the kid actually pulls the trigger, that he can be helped, that he can be reached, that is a kid that is falling down a path of destruction. He hasn't reached the end yet. And until you reach the end, you can still be pulled off of it. And that the biggest thing that helped me was simple human compassion, simple connection. It wasn't someone coming to me with a program and someone coming to me with this project. It was a friend sitting down next to me and treating me like I was a human. I was covered in dirt and blood and nastiness and chaos, and he still treated me like I was a kid. And that, to me, is the important thing we need to do. The failure that happens is trying to mitigate the after effects and trying to stop the damage afterwards and trying to put in all these Band-Aids to try to make the adults feel better. If you talk to a kid in class, they know what kids in their class are super depressed, what ones are on the edge, what ones are living in hell, which ones are very abused, which ones are very aggressive and stuck up, and which ones have borderline personality disorders, which ones are just having anxiety issues and need to have more care. No one ever talks to the kids who actually have the problem. No one ever digs in to the actual human behind any of the story.
Here is David Reedman again, the school shooting researcher.
And I think that's what we're missing in fortification of the schools, in adding school police officers, and creating all of these levels of fortresses around schools and public spaces. The person that ultimately wants to commit a mass shooting is somebody who's very, very deeply hurt. And rather than trying to keep that person further out and demonize that person even further, if we can just show them a tiny bit of kindness, a lot of these shootings would never happen. Probably none of these shootings would happen.
David Reedman, when he was in high school, had his own terrifying experience with a series of shootings.
In October 2002, there were 17 different random sniper attacks in the Washington, D.C. area. And there was no clue as to why they were happening and where the next one was going to be. So there were 2 gentlemen, one older, one a teenager. The older man was the car driver. The younger man laid in the back and fired through a hole that they had made in the trunk. And they drove to random locations and shot people. And they were only caught when they started leaving clues, which eventually led to their arrest. And that was 3 weeks where really going to school every day, there was genuine fear that you weren't going to come home. We left the school in groups of 5, running in a zigzag pattern. And that really framed, I think, a lot of my future experiences around school shootings and gun violence.
If you look at the long arc of David Reedman's career as someone who wants to protect innocent people from terrible things, you see that it, too, was a long chain of events. The fear that fueled him in high school, the fear of tragedy, has driven him to prevent as many tragedies as he can. This is an absolute reverse image of the chain of events that create so many tragedies, so many failures, as we've been calling them today. The fact that we humans are capable of this, too, of creating a virtuous circle rather than a vicious circle, is testimony to the fact that failure is not inevitable. So let's keep figuring it out together. Next week in